Okay, good evening, everyone. I think we'll get started. Sego ani buju endio wachaya kwe kwe. As Mayor of the City of Kingston, I words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one, honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who are entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having as we share this space now and walk side by side into the future. So with that, we will officially call to order this council meeting. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mayor Patterson, we have quorum. I'd like to confirm at this time, we have all members of council in attendance except for Councillor Holland and Councillor Stroud, who I believe is just entering the room now from staff. We have Paige Agnew, Commissioner of Community Services, who is also filling in as acting CIO this evening. Peter Hugenbos, Commissioner of Business, Environment and Projects. Brad Joyce, Commissioner of Corporate Services. Sheila Kidd, Commissioner of Transportation and Public Works. Desiree Kennedy, Chief Financial Officer and City Treasurer. John Bolognone, City Clerk. Jennifer Campbell, Director of Heritage Services. Lisa Capener-Hunt, Director of Building Enforcement. Jenna Morley, Director of Legal Services and City Solicitor. Ian Semple, Director of Transportation Services. Kyle Compo, Manager of Licensing and Enforcement. Janet James, myself, Deputy City Clerk. Elizabeth Fawcett is our meeting host tonight. Chris Savern is our tech support. And from the public, we have delegations from Megan Knott and Krista Leclerc. Second delegation from Alexander Legnini. Third delegation from Ron Hartland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we did not have a meeting, committee of the whole closed meeting. So we'll move to approval of the addeds. Again, we have three delegations, a motion of congratulations. And then we also have a additional clause for report number 83. So I'm a mover and a seconder for those addeds. Please move by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanik. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, I, Robert Kiley of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my potential pecuniary interest in terms of Report 84, Clause 1, as I have family who operate short-term rentals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other disclosures of pecuniary interest, we will move on. We have no presentations this evening, but we do have three delegations. So first, I will invite Megan Knott from Tourism Kingston and Krista Leclerc from Kingston Accommodation Partners to appear before council to speak to clause 1 of report number 84 from the CAO with respect to short-term rental set fine amounts. And just a reminder to all of the delegations this evening, you have 5 minutes. And after that, I will open it up to questions from members of council. Ms. Knott and Ms. Leclerc, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor Patterson. So my name is Megan Knott. I'm here with my colleague, Krista Leclerc, and we're talking in regards to short-term accommodations, which we have talked to from time to time at council before. So this time we wanted to specifically, and we can, next slide, please. Just to reiterate Tourism Kingston's value add of partnerships in relation to all sales and marketing efforts within the City of Kingston as it relates to accommodations and other tourism providers. So this slide just sort of makes sure that we impress upon council that through our channels and through our efforts, we're what we think is a valuable partner to those in the tourism sector as it relates to supporting the marketing efforts and the initiatives that draw people into the city and allow them to stay and enjoy no matter the season, no matter the time, and for various reasons. And so we have some referral or some statistics just in front of you to suggest that we do have a loyal following of folks, and we do really generate lots of leads to our operators. So these are STR operators as standalone hotels and various other kinds of motels and short-term accommodations. And so just making sure that, we articulate that ideally in a non-pandemic environment, we're about 1.4 $1 million in direct media spend to make sure that we're promoting things to do and places to stay in the city of Kingston. And of course, we're not trying to disclude anybody. And so making sure that that platform includes as many operators as possible. And that just describes the accommodation profile specifically that we do with operators. Next slide, please. And so as it relates to the topic tonight, we're just speaking in support of the initiative that's taking place as the report outlines. That we would like to ensure that the bylaw team at the City of Kingston has the proper enforcement mechanisms in place to allow us to be able to work with all partners across all platforms within the City of Kingston. And it's really hard to work with folks that we don't know, contact information for, essentially. And we want to make sure that the playing field is level in terms of marketing all accommodation providers across all systems and all platforms that we promote. And so we think that this mechanism that's presented tonight is a fair one and something that we wanted to ensure that we spoke to in support of. So essentially we can fold, the remaining X amount of STRs that are not, within the mix of Tourism Kingston. The 22 licensed folks that have come forward since June of 2021 are, but just making sure that we unravel who else could potentially work within our partnerships so that we can have full marketing efforts for those that come and choose to stay in Kingston. Next slide, please. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Krista.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you all for having us here to speak to you again. I just on this slide like to highlight some of the impacts the pandemic has had on the accommodation sector as a whole. So since the pandemic hit, 13 hotels in Kingston were closed for a total of 56 months. Hotels do continue to be one of the sectors identified by partners across the country as well as government as hardest hit. There is certainly a slow return of segments such as meetings and conferences. And so this isn't to be confused with the brief, busy August and September seen in the leisure market. That's just one very small segment of the types of people that come and fill our hotels throughout and accommodations throughout the year. And of course, we're still grappling with the labor shortage, which has really grown into a crisis, and the impact that that has on reaching occupancy potential. These challenges are also faced by the STR sector, reflecting the lower numbers of STRs operating at this time really is due to these pieces listed above and not just due to regulation. Data provided by AirDNA shows that the drop in STR listings in Kingston correlates with pandemic lockdowns. Even the accommodations in Kingston through hotels and motels that were in the dark period, as we call it, did operate with a license. Data from the Kingston dashboard, which I'm going to show you next, does demonstrate that Kingston STRs, despite the pandemic, fared better than our competitor sets in Niagara, London, Kelowna, Ottawa, and Waterloo. Next slide,
30
please.
seconds. 30 seconds.
Okay, so thank you. So quickly, this slide here does identify that room supply in 2018 to 2020 shows a steep decline when the pandemic hit, and Kingston is, this is Kingston for all the years, but you can see the blue there of last year's where it really dropped off. Next slide, please. This shows that the room night growth in Kingston for 2020 really was aligned with the last slide where room supply dipped because of the pandemic. Next slide, please.
So I think, Ms. Leclerc, we're at 5 minutes, so I'm going to pause there. Obviously, if there's any questions from council, then you can address anything else with the questions. Okay, are there any questions from council? Councillor Neal. Councillor Neal, you're on mute.
Sorry, I ask this all the time, but if the clerks can forward to mayor and council the slide deck, since we weren't able to get through all of it, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question for Ms. Leclerc. Thanks for showing us the slides. Right now, is it showing that it's going more upward? Is it showing any type of recovery near the bottom of 2021?
Yes, thank you so much. So it is showing that it is starting to increase as of June of this past year. And this is a trend that we're seeing in like cities across Ontario as well.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I guess my question would be that you related the downward trend in STRs to the pandemic. What would you say to the 100 STR owners that have since informed members of council that the reason they had nothing to do with the pandemic and it had to do with the new rules and everything? So, and basically an unofficial poll, but 35% of them responded and said it had nothing to do with the pandemic. So if we're seeing numbers go up, is it very slight, or is it that they're just not coming back?
Yeah, thank you. I'll jump in, and then Megan, you might want to add. So I would say that the data speaks for itself. I think that the data is really clear that the drop was directly related to those months, March and April of 2020, and it stayed that way until we start to see it very slowly increasing in this past June 2021. I think that we've heard that it's easier to rent long term. We certainly know that short term rentals under the 30 days is more lucrative market. But I think that in a time when we've seen essentially travel stop, and again, right now we're seeing leisure start to come back, but there's so much other travel not coming back, and leisure is just a very small snippet of the year. So I think in those times and considering those pieces, it makes sense that that there was an interest in going into longer term stays, knowing that that's the kind of travel that was out there.
Thank you for that answer. So you actually touched on something I would hope you could elaborate on. You just mentioned it's more lucrative to do short term, but it's easier to do long term. But what we just did made it more difficult to do short term. Is that not correct? Is that not possibly contributing to the lowering of the number as well?
Thank you. I don't think that being a licensed business makes it more challenging, especially at the very small fee that Kingston is seeing for licensing a property. What I mean when I say easier to do long term is I mean as it relates to cleaning protocols and everything that we've seen out of the pandemic in relation to that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the presenter if there was anything else in her presentation that she really wanted us to know.
Thank you very much. My last slide there, or second to last that I was going to show you, was just to compare that Kingston to the other cities that were identified earlier, really is trending alongside that. So and remembering that all of these other communities are at different stages of their licensing for short-term rentals. So Kingston isn't an anomaly that we implemented a bylaw and then had a big drop in short-term rentals, that all of these communities saw a drop at the beginning of the pandemic, and I would expect that would return slowly as we've seen other tourism sectors return. Thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Oosterhoff.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation. Have we, of the 22 licensed STRs that we do have we been able to differentiate which are the type of home share where the homeowners live and the type that are unoccupied dwellings, like, I don't know a better term, like Airbnb or something like that, that style?
I'm just going to insert myself because I feel like that's probably a better question for city staff than it would be for the delegation.
Okay, that's fine.
Just because, yeah, I think that speaks more to the staff report, unless the delegation has any information that they have or provide to them.
Thank you, and through you, you are correct. The licensing process is through city staff, so I wouldn't know the breakdown of that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your worship. One of the items that was of hot debate the last time presented was representation without taxation without representation. So I'm wondering who you've added to your board of CAP who represents the short-term rental market.
Yes, thank you. So actually, I will let Megan jump in here because it was identified that the best place, because again, the municipal accommodation tax will be going through the city and funneling through to Tourism Kingston for marketing efforts. So it was identified that that's really the best place, as well as the different committees that the Tourism Kingston has. So I think that's on Megan's radar.
I would like to remind you that you had indicated that you would be welcoming someone from the short-term rental group to join you on that. So that answer is no, then, is what the answer is, not shuffled over to Tourism Kingston. Thank you.
So, okay. So, Ms. Knott, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chappelle. So we did a call back in 2020. And we didn't get a volunteer or any interest, quite frankly, from the STR community. So I will plant the seed again right now publicly, because we are going to do a call. We have, I think, 3 board seats actually that we need to fill. We go calendar year, as you know, Councillor Chappelle. So in 2022, we'll have 3 board seats that have either 1, 2, or 3-year terms. So if council wants to, because they seem to be very connected with the STR operators in our community, if you could help me leverage this message out to those folks, that they obviously connect with me and I can articulate how that process works at Tourism Kingston, we'd be more than happy either for engagement of operators either on our committees or at a board level. And was there something else I was supposed to speak to? No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Knott and Ms. DeClaire, thank you very much. And with that, we will move to our second delegation. We will invite Alexander Legnini to appear before council to speak to clause 1 of report number 84 from the CAO with respect to short-term rental set fine amounts. Mr. Legnini, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you for taking the time to hear my thoughts on this. The reason I asked to speak to you tonight, I read through the report from Ms. Agnew, found a number of items I wanted to address before council votes on it. Got really limited time, so I just want to focus on one important issue, though there are many in the report. But I think the most important issue to focus on is the reliability of the data that's going to be used to support these fines. Council chose to implement a pretty unprecedented system, I think, in that there's third-party surveillance used to enforce this bylaw. When I say it's unprecedented, I mean, you know, in the city of Kingston, we don't use third-party companies to look through social media or Facebook Marketplace to find citizens that are selling items out of their house without a business license or things like that. Most of it is relying on complaints and staff investigations. So I feel it's a little bit unprecedented. I don't want to debate the wisdom of the choice because it's already been decided, but I do think it merits a lot of oversight and serious questioning on the accuracy and the reliability, especially when we're talking about discussing fines. I think it would be really embarrassing if we start seeing stories about homeowners that are wrongly fined and having the burden to disprove allegations based on this data, which might be questionable. So I want to focus that with the time I have remaining. So Harmari advertised itself to the city as a tech company that has some kind of proprietary algorithm which allows them to accomplish 2 goals: address verification for short-term rentals without a license, and MAT remittance estimates. So Ms. Agnew confirmed to Mr. Stroud that Harmari does not have access to any kind of confidential information. So they're not, for example, they're not sneaking into Airbnb servers and getting any kind of confidential data. They're working off the same data that any member of the public or city employee can see when you pull up the public Airbnb website. So you see a host name, and maybe their real name may not be. You see an approximate location that's provided by Airbnb. It's like a general geographic area, nothing specific. and the host may or may not have uploaded an exterior picture of the building. So I got some familiarity with computer modeling. I'm not a data scientist expert, but any algorithm is only going to be as good as the data you put into it. And I don't think you have to be an expert to realize that there's no magical algorithm that could deduce an address based on the data that you're going to have in some of these cases. You may not have an exterior of the building. You may have a general location that doesn't really tell you much. I think, and if you do come up with an address, it's likely to be inaccurate. What they're probably doing is they're looking at Google Street View. They're comparing exterior pictures with what may be on the listing. They're comparing the host name maybe with property records. I don't think they're doing anything sophisticated. And I think that's probably why they won't answer the questions very well when you ask them. They may have created some kind of system for doing this quickly, but I don't think they're doing anything super sophisticated. I think these tech companies, it's common marketing to claim you have some kind of proprietary algorithm and hope people don't ask too many questions. But I think it's easy to see how this type of system could give you bad data, which is important to consider when we're talking about finding people. And I would just want to say, staff can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong about this, because I've tried to follow up over the past year to clarify this exact issue. And I've been told, we'll look into it. Haven't really gotten responses on if they've been told by Harmari that they have some special way of finding this. But I think they're probably just looking at Street View and comparing it to pictures. The more important deficiency I see in the data relates to Harmari's data relates to the MAT collection estimates. So we've already established they don't have access to any kind of secret information. All they can see is what's publicly available. And based on this data, there's no way for them to get an accurate MAT collection estimate. I just want to read a quick excerpt from the December 15 council meeting. It's an exchange between Councillor Hill and Ms. Agnew, because I think it demonstrates the misunderstanding here. So Councillor Hill said, my understanding is that when a person wants to book something on Airbnb, they open up the website, they check the calendar, and it shows whether it's available, whether it's booked or blocked out for those dates. And my understanding is that what Harmari does is it checks the calendar, cross-references with Kijiji or other providers. There's never going to be someone from Harmari outside your door asking people why certain dates are blocked out, because they would find that on the calendar. Am I correct? Ms. Agnew responded, yes, that's correct. And this is the crucial misunderstanding.
Thank you, sir. So I'm sorry. So we're actually past 5 minutes. So I'm just going to have to move from there to the questions from council. So are there any questions from council for the delegation? Yes, Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, I'm wondering if the delegation could finish the last part that they were going to read. That would be
so yeah, you have to form it as a question, Councillor Bone.
Would you like to finish the last part that you read?
Thank you. I'll be extremely brief. So I think this is the crucial misunderstanding. So assuming Harmari does not have some kind of confidential data that they told us they don't, they just have the public data. They can't come up with a MAT estimate. The reason is that when a host blocks out a date on their calendar as unavailable, like let's say they're going on vacation or they're doing renovations, they block out a month on their calendar. They can see it on their calendar as blocked. It looks different than when it's booked by a guest. But from the public side, it looks exactly the same. When you look at a calendar of a place you want to book and you see that dates are unavailable, you can't tell whether it's booked by someone or whether the host has blocked it out because they're away or for a million reasons. And that's what Harmari's looking at. Harmari's looking at the public side. So they have no way of seeing if a host has blocked out a calendar or if they've been booked that whole month. And that makes their estimates of MAT collection it's meaningless data because they have no way of making that differentiation. And I think Councillor Hill was trying to understand that. I think it's a you wouldn't know unless you were a host that was the case. But I think that makes their service that they're providing essentially useless. And I just want to point out that report AP-20-011 It was a February 2020 report to the City of Kingston. It states, City of Kingston was able to contact a Toronto-based company named Harmari that collects the same technology-based strategy to discover STRs. CAP concluded that Harmari does not provide the required information to effectively collect the MAT. This was about a year and a half ago, that a staff report. So I think the city came to the same conclusion. They must have changed their mind at some point. I really feel that this is a magic beanstalk algorithm. They're saying they have this magic algorithm that can do all this stuff, paying them $18,000 a year. And I don't think the data is reliable. And I just want that to be taken into consideration when you're considering making it much easier to dole out fines based on this type of thing.
Thank you, Councillor Bump. Follow up. Next on my list is Councillor or Deputy Mayor Ostroff.
I forgot I was actually that, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. Are you, I really appreciate your time and for giving us this information. It's been difficult for all of us to understand. So are you actually an STR?
I was an STR. I was an STR host before the bylaw was passed, yes.
Okay. And okay, I just want to thank you for the courage to speak and bring that to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, are there any other questions from Council? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Alexander, thank you for your presentation. I'd just like to add a little bit more to your content of you were an STR proponent and obviously an advocate for the great city of Kingston in your own way. Are you at liberty to share why you chose to suspend being an STR participant?
There were a number of reasons. Certainly the bylaw was one of them. I decided to shift to longer term rentals. Both still, I would consider it short term, but the bylaw wouldn't, more in the range of a month to 2 months. Yeah, that would be the main reason. It was the bylaw.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Strap.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Lignini, thank you for appearing with us today and taking the time to analyze the situation. From most of your delegation was to do with Harmari and our partnership with Harmari, and of course I was there when this was all presented to the committee, and I shared many of those concerns. So I would say that where we are now, as you said at the beginning, we've made a decision. So I would say for the purpose of tonight's decision, could you tell us a little bit more about why you think it is relevant to tonight's decision? What is the nature of the data we're getting from Harmari and the nature of the claims that they've made about their algorithm and so on that you've already spoken? How is that relevant to our decision tonight? So just for council.
So that's a good point. And I could be accused of trying to sneak in my feelings about Harmari into a not totally related discussion. I do think when you're considering fines, and like I said, what council has chosen to implement here, third-party surveillance to enforce the bylaw, is pretty unprecedented. And I think it necessitates a high degree of oversight on what the data is that you're going to use to decide on those fines. We're talking about fines here tonight. So I think there's a really high bar. You really want to know what the data is that you're looking at that's going to decide those fines. I know staff investigation is going to be involved before someone's fined, but the data that you're using to come up with who we're going to look into, I think is really suspect. And I think this is, to my knowledge, the first time council has used something like this to enforce a bylaw. So I think it's really important to make sure we know where we're getting the data and is it reliable. But you're right, it's not maybe it's not strictly related to tonight's issue, but I think it is tangentially.
Well, I actually, no, thank you for that response, because that will allow me to form a question for staff directly on that point, on whether the data from Hamari is directly linked to the decision to trigger the bylaw enforcement team. So that is an excellent aspect to bring up, and I thank you for that. I do have another question about the general shift that we've heard. It's not just yourself, but other hosts who have written to us and said that they now, like yourself, are offering longer term accommodations that to which the bylaw does not apply. So I would say, how would you describe the advantages of your current arrangement, and how would you compare it to what you had before when you were just doing the short-term rentals with Airbnb?
I don't want to take my personal example, as I don't think it's particularly meaningful because I'm one person, and to be honest, I think it was more a matter of convenience. I didn't want to go through the work of the application, but that's not to say that's anytime you have a bylaw where you have to register, you're going to have some kind of registration process. So I don't think my situation is relevant to saying anything good or bad about the bylaw. It was just, in my case, it was very easy to switch to longer term rentals that the bylaw did not apply for. So I said, why bother with the hassle of going through the registration?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Mr. Lignini, I can't recall if you were one of the folks, because we heard from a number who indicated that their preference would have been to have Airbnb be the
yes,
kind of the source. Were you one of the folks that supported that?
Yes.
So if we had gone with that and Airbnb had made that had become that kind of I guess middleman or agent, would these fines be appropriate? If that were the circumstance, as opposed to what we ended up choosing, like, are these fines in the range of reasonable, given what they're trying to do with them? And would they have been even if it had been Airbnb?
Are you referring to the amount of the fines?
Yeah. What's proposed tonight as the range of fines and the amount? I mean, obviously, there can be some differences of opinion to a degree, but the fact that these fines would apply for these purposes, is that a reasonable process to follow if you had a middleman that you folks could agree with or could support?
Yeah, certainly. Whenever you have a bylaw, you have to have enforcement mechanisms. You have to have fines. So it's certainly reasonable to have fines if people aren't complying. I don't have any special knowledge to speak about the amount of the fines, whether you guys would know that much better than me, in context of other bylaws, what's a reasonable fine. But I think the point you brought up is really important. If Airbnb had been used, a lot of these fines would be you wouldn't need them because it would be automatic. If a host located in a certain postal code rented, the tax would be automatically collected, automatically remitted. You wouldn't have hosts that were not self-remitting, because it would just be an automatic thing. It would be easier, it would be more accurate. And a really important point to bring up, when I brought up when a host blocks a calendar, they can see what is blocked versus what is booked. When the public looks at it, everyone else, when they look at the website, they see a calendar blocked looking the same as a booking. You can't differentiate when you're looking at someone's calendar whether something's booked or something's blocked. The only third party that can differentiate that is Airbnb. And that's the one party we've chosen to exclude from enforcement and collection of MAT, is the one party that can figure that out for us. You know, the only party that knows how many nights a week, a month a host is booked, how much they've charged, how much mat they should be remitting. The only party that knows that with 100% accuracy is Airbnb, and we've said we don't want you involved in helping us collect. We want this third-party company who, like I said, they're going off of public data, which is not much. You know, I can go on someone's calendar right now. I can go on someone's listing and, you know, try and get a sense of, okay, maybe they booked a couple nights that month, or maybe they're just away that week. You know, I don't know. You know, the data we're getting publicly is just not going to be accurate. The only party that has accurate info is Airbnb, and we've chosen to exclude them from this.
We would, like, we did undertake that we would review this after a year. So if we're not getting that data, presumably we're going to find that out. But having said that, the fact that there is established some fines, that does make sense for folks, whoever the middleman is, to do that, right? Yeah.
So was that a second question?
Well, I think it was answered already. I think Mr. Lignini acknowledged that there does need to be some enforcement and fines. So
yeah, I certainly agree that, you know, whenever you have a bylaw, you have to have fines or some enforcement mechanism. I do hope that we do find out in a year whether the data we've gotten from Harmari is reasonably accurate. I'm afraid there's just no way to verify it, and that's the hard thing. I want to point out in pages in Ms. Agnew's report, she noted that she has sent over 100 letters to hosts that are in non-compliance twice. We've surveyed as a group all the hosts we know, and we can't find anyone that have gotten these letters. And I presume she's gotten the addresses to send these letters to from Harmari. So that might give us some indication as to the accuracy of the address verification module. You know, obviously this is anecdotal. I've asked, you know, maybe 50 or 60 hosts in our group, have any of you gotten this letter from the city? Everyone says no. So, you know, that's an anecdotal indication of the accuracy of Harmari's address data.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we will move to our third and final delegation this evening. We will invite Ron Hartling to appear before council to speak to clause 1, report number 84 from the CAO, again, with respect to short-term rental set fine amounts. Hartling, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, thank you, councillors. My goal is to provide you with a reality check on the current state of Kingston's short-term rental market before you decide on fines for allegedly non-compliant hosts. I was motivated by last Friday's Week article, which gave the false impression that there were some 143 active STR hosts out there, with all but 44 ignoring their obligation to register. Since that's highly misleading, I decided yesterday to send these 4 survey questions to all 88 known STR hosts for whom we have valid email addresses. With only 24 hours for them to reply, I would have been happy with a 20% response, but was gratified to get 35%. The respondents include many of Kingston's previously most active effective STR hosts, whose views on the post-bylaw state of affairs are well worth listening to. In a nutshell, Council's December decision to reject the Admin Policy Committee's carefully crafted compromise in favor of the unpalatable staff proposal has eviscerated Kingston's previously vibrant STR sector. Nearly 3/4 of the responding hosts have decided to abandon STRs, and Kingston will be the poorer for it. Had the APC motion been accepted, healthy MAT revenues would have been rolling in since May. Perhaps staff have reported to you on the actual revenue collected, but I expected it to have been pathetic. It's unlikely to get much better since only the few remaining STR hosts will be contributing to the revenue stream. Please understand that the pandemic has made it very difficult to safely rent rooms within one's home. Most still viable STR rentals are therefore separate units which allow for social distancing. Those are precisely the units which would have generated the most MAT revenues, but happen to be the ones which can be switched to medium-term rental with no more than a few clicks. Let me be clear that the motivation for doing so is not to avoid paying MAT, which all hosts are on record as having been willing to remit. But only a quarter of the respondents will tolerate the invasions of privacy inherent in subjecting themselves to the current bylaw. Since we didn't get your collective vote when we asked for it, we're instead exercising our right to vote with our feet. It's worth noting that the detailed cost-benefit comparison of the two options, which we shared with councillors last year, with all councillors, clearly showed the staff proposal to be a financial loser, but the reality has proven even worse than our prediction. Respondents who decided to leave the STR sector were asked to share their primary reason. Fully half cited disgust with the whole process leading to the December decision. The surveillance aspects were the final straw for another 25%, all of which suggests that the damage to the STR sector is primarily attributable to the bylaw process. I submit the motion before you to impose fines for non-compliance with the licensing requirement is largely superfluous, since most of those who have decided to continue with STR hosting have already complied. New fines will essentially make no difference to the MAT revenues, which this bylaw is supposed to be all about, and are therefore not worth the effort. The few respondents whose particular circumstances require them to continue with STR, but have not yet applied, actually admitted to me that they were waiting until the last minute as their only way to convey their dissatisfaction with the process. That should be a sobering thought to those of us lacking an enforcement is all mentality. So where to go from here? In my federal government experience, it wasn't uncommon for senior bureaucrats to double down when adverse outcomes demonstrated the flaws of their decisions, rather than admitting they'd been wrong. Approving new fines when the current strategy has failed smells of that dynamic. What I would suggest that council instead use Hamari's list of 143 purported hosts as an opportunity to better understand the problem. I certainly don't expect you to make decisions based on my quick survey, especially since I'm not a disinterested party. But community services is also not disinterested. I suggest that council commission an independent analyst, one who's never worked with community services and has no interest in doing so, to contact as many of those 143 people as possible, guaranteeing anonymity, ascertaining if they are indeed STR hosts, and finding out why those who have not yet registered haven't done so. At the very least,
3 seconds.
It would provide council with an objective measure of the value of the Hamari contract before that comes up for renewal. Ideally, the results would provide a solid basis for remedying this mess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Okay, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. Just two very quick questions for Ron. One, are you currently or do you intend to be an STR provider?
The answer is no. Within an hour of the council decision last December, we switched our minimum booking date to 31 days and moved into the medium term rental market.
Okay. I'm curious so therefore you have never paid the fee. When you were operational, did you have a City of Kingston business license?
No, as far as I was never aware that one was required.
Okay, thank you.
And that had actually never come up in any discussions with councillors in this entire, in this entire exercise.
It was a question that I had asked last year, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neal. Next on my list is Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. We've heard that STR hosts or former ones are not participating in the STR market because of the nature of the bylaw. And we've also heard that participation is down in a number of cities because of the pandemic.
Mhm.
How would you suggest that council differentiate between the relative effects of these two causes?
I guess you'd have to do a survey of the hosts like I did. And, you know, from the slide that I showed you of those who are leaving, they were specifically asked, what's your primary reason for leaving, ceasing to be an STR host? 50% expressed disgust for the being disgusted at the bylaw. 23% said surveillance, concern about surveillance was their primary concern, and that's mine. I just don't want to expose myself to all of this stuff. And only 14% cited the pandemic. So that's the only data I have. Maybe if that if the council took up that suggestion of having a broader analysis of Hermari's 143 list, they'd get more, you could get more information to validate that hypothesis.
Okay. I'm not saying I accept your answer. Okay, let's be clear. But you did say that you thought the fines were, you considered them superfluous. So in regard to the recommendation in front of us tonight, I take it you would say it makes no difference. It may make a difference to the operation of the system, but affecting the market one way or the other.
I don't think it's going to be worth the cost, because anybody who is in the, as far as I know, I can see anybody who is in the decides to stay in the STR market is going to, is going to apply. We're business, we're small business people. There's no point in subjecting ourselves to fines, but the numbers are so small because, at least from my survey, or of the current STR groups who I've been, the STR hosts that I've been speaking with, almost all of those have already signed up. They're people who, for various reasons, their units don't lend themselves to medium-term rentals, except for a few that are going to wait until the last minute to make a point, but they are fully intending to do it. So I'm just saying that these fines aren't going to make a lot of difference. So why spend the resources setting up such a system?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Chappelle.
The elusive unmute button escapes me, Your Worship, always. I can't seem to find that mouse. Mr. Hartling, I appreciate you presenting tonight. Certainly had a lot of discussions with you over the course of the last 2 years. One of the things that I want to know is that since the last meeting in December, have you or members of your group that you're personally aware of, have you had any consultation with the city since that horrible night?
None whatsoever. The group, until the Whig article talking about alerting us to this meeting came up, last Friday, we actually hadn't met as a group. There's just a general sense that, after all that effort, why bother? And we'll just go our separate ways and leave STR behind.
Would you describe that as a collaborative nature with the city?
No, there has been no collaboration. I think I did receive one email from a member of the bylaw team asking me to promote a seminar or something like that.
And we heard from the other presenter this evening.
Councillor Chappelle, that's two questions. I'm sorry, I'll be fair to everybody. So are there any other questions for delegation? Yeah, Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I guess my question would be, and this is to try to clarify something. You mentioned earlier that you did not have a business license prior to that, and were you aware that that was not a requirement up until this point?
This is the first time it's ever been mentioned to me by anyone.
So you were aware that it was not previously a requirement then?
Yeah, I didn't think it was.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Hartling, thank you very much. And with that, we will move on in our agenda. We have no further delegations. We have no briefings. Are there any petitions to present? Okay, seeing none, we do have one motion of congratulations moved by Mayor Patterson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Osterhoff. The congratulations of Kingston City Council will be extended to Property Standards MLEO Officer Mark Vickery in recognition of receiving an Ontario Municipal Law Enforcement Long Service Medal for 15 years of service in Ontario as a municipal law enforcement officer. Thank you for your continued service to our community. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on, we have no deferred motions, so we will move to reports. And first up, we have report number 83 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Kiley, that report number 83 from the Chief Administrative Officer consent be received and adopted.
Yes, there are 4 clauses. Would anyone like any of those clauses separated? Okay, seeing no separations, then we will vote on them as a whole. So clause 1 is award of contract, sign reflectivity, inspection, and inventory update. Clause 2, parking bylaw minor amendments. Clause 3, parking license agreement, virtue car share program. And clause 4, ratification of citizen representative appointments to citizen to review council remuneration 2022 to 2026. Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 84 from the CA.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Stroud, that report number 84 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted.
Okay, so there's just the one clause, short-term rental set fine amounts. Any discussion? Councillor Stroud.
I'd like to bring council's attention to the schedule of fines for my comment. So that would be, we'll find the page here. You know, the table where it says the 250, the 500, the 750 there. So my question for staff is essentially how we came up with these numbers. I know there's some information in the report, but it just struck me, these numbers being, there's only 3 numbers on this table. Does everyone know where I'm looking at here? The set fine schedule from Exhibit A. The numbers are either 250, 500, or 750, depending on what the offense is. And that just struck me as, and it'll strike members of the public as sort of very, very round numbers. So 250, 500, or 750. There's of course court costs added on, which is a percentage of the fine. So you'll see on a $500, it's $615. On a $750, the total comes to $880. But I'd like to know from staff, like, how did we land on those 3, that fee schedule, 250, 500, 750?
Thank you, and through your worship, actually, our city solicitor, Jenna Morley, is going to speak to that. Thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Morley, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. These numbers were arrived at through a survey of other municipalities and the set fine amounts that they had previously applied for and obtained approval for. It's not uncommon to see these as round numbers. They tend to be unrounded numbers once you add on the victim surcharge and the court costs.
Well, okay, no, I thank you for that. Maybe you don't have the exact process, but That it says essentially that in the report. That's not really an answer to my question. How did we land on exactly 250, 500, 750? Because that's not what the other municipalities have.
So through you, your worship, we arrived at these numbers based on what the other municipalities had already applied for and obtained approval for. Obviously, every municipality has different amounts, but this is the median amount that we were seeing from other municipalities. These amounts are ultimately approved by the regional senior judge, and we were confident that these amounts would be approved.
I'm sorry. I can't accept that the answer that these are the median amounts, because a median is an exact number. And these are 200, 250, 500, 750. There's no way random chance would give you those numbers.
So Councillor Stroud, you don't have to accept the response from staff. That is the response.
Then I'll ask another question, because I need to know how what other factors went into the decision of proposing these particular set times. Because it's not a median. You can tell that from looking at the table of the other municipalities.
Through your worship, we look at the severity of the offense. Typically, we're seeing a minimum fine of $500. For lesser offenses, there was a lesser amount being proposed, which is half of that minimum fine.
Well, I would suggest to council that that there's two main aspects to this question we're about to vote on. One is whether or not it's reasonable to have to make the request to the Attorney General for set fines, as opposed to the already in place system of having AMP and possibly a summons, Part 3 summons, right? As the low end and the high end of enforcement. So the first question we have to answer for ourselves is it reasonable to have a set fine amount that's a higher number than the AMP for the reasons given in the report, to have an efficiency in the system to avoid the costly and time-consuming court summons side of things. That is one aspect. So the question of whether or not it makes sense to have this, I think, is a fairly easy one to answer individually, and I know what I'm going to say. But on the exact numbers, I'm not happy to approve what, after hearing that explanation, seems like a very arbitrary amount. So this is a highly controversial system that we're putting in place here. We need to be able to justify the size of the fine. Why not, 200, 400, 600, for example? Why wasn't that fee schedule considered?
Okay, is there someone from staff that wants to ask? So why did we not select 200, 400, 600?
Thank you. And through your worship, I just wanted to point out, again, we look at municipal comparisons when we are trying to substantiate what a set fine recommendation would be to council and ultimately the Solicitor General. Council has the determination or the ability to obviously change or rectify any of the recommended set fines. But again, I do want to point out that at this current time, the only option to enforce short-term rental licensing right now is by way of a Part 3 summons. And if for that, any individual corporation or officer or director of a corporation found guilty under the bylaw could face a fine between $500 and $10,000 for each day and or part of a day for the offense that continues. So we also had the report that went to the administrative policies, and that was report number AP 21013. That was in June, on June 10th. So council has already deferred the recommendation on administrative monetary penalties. So at this time, we do not have the ability to ask council for the direction to impose AMPs for another year because of that deferral. So the only option that we have right now is to either go by way of Part 3 summons which is a more punitive approach than what we're recommending right now. So when I know that doesn't necessarily answer your question either, Councillor Stroud, but I think that's an important aspect of it. And when we look at the comparisons for municipalities, what's presented in the report is the municipalities are using administrative monetary penalties. And those are the numbers that through some of our comparisons that we're seeing, the set fines are always higher than the administrative monetary penalties. And like we're proposing tonight, it's based on the comparisons through a variety of municipalities that we come up with this recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that answer. That helps. That helps a lot, because you mentioned another aspect which had slipped my mind. The AMP is not an option right now because it was deferred by administrative policy. So maybe someone from staff could just remind council how it is that we're voting on a different kind of penalty for an item that was deferred by committee.
Commissioner.
Thank you, and through you. So yes, as part of the original staff recommendation related to the enactment of the bylaw, staff were recommending at that time that we pursue amendments to the bylaw to allow an administrative monetary penalty with respect to non-compliance with this bylaw. But there was a modification by council before the bylaw itself was passed to remove the use of AMPs with respect to enforcement options for STRs in particular. And because of that decision, this is why we're before you tonight with a report for set fines, because the AMP option that staff recommended was not supported by council in June. So as Mr. Compo indicated, without set fines, the option that we have for enforcement of the bylaw as it is now is a Part 3 summons process, which would mean that any operator that is not in compliance with the bylaw, they would receive that Part 3 summons, and then the whole process of enforcement goes through the Ontario court process and goes before a judge, as opposed to being dealt with more at the municipal level from a less punitive standpoint, which is why we're recommending the set fines to council this evening.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand the Part 3 summons, but now I'm actually more confused, because Mr. Compo said that the decision to allow AMP was deferred by the committee. You've said it wasn't supported by council. So is it dead or is it in deferral?
Ms. Morley.
Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. And just a point of clarification, I think Mr. Compo used the word deferred. It was actually removed from the recommendation prior to council passing it. So it wasn't a deferral. It was a removal of that section of the enacting bylaw so that it wouldn't apply to the enforcement of STRs. That was recommended at committee and then carried through at council in the decision that was made in June.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, where we are now is we're actually worse than where we started, because we've got the Part 3 summons remains, as with all bylaws, an option to escalate, but we don't have the
30 seconds, Councillor Stroud.
We don't have the much more reasonable lower AMP amount. And so this seems like a technicality that you're coming with a set fine that's with amounts that are similar to administrative monetary policies, which was already voted down by council or removed by council. So I fear that we're not gonna be able to decide on this tonight, and I think I will support a deferral if that's the thing comes up.
So you are right at 5 minutes, Councillor Stroud. So I will allow you to put forward a motion, but you need to have you submitted anything to the clerks, or are you putting something on the floor now?
No, what I said, Your Worship, was I would support a deferral.
Oh, you would support. Okay, I'm sorry. I misheard. Okay. Thank you. Next time I list is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. Question for either Ms. Agnew or Ms. Morley. I'm very tired. I think I lost my questions. But Councillor Hill brought up and jogged my memory that there was an agreement that within a year we would review both our selection and the process. When is that year coming up?
Thank you, and
think
through you,
it's-
your worship. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
No, go ahead. I was just going to point out that I saw your hand waving. So go ahead.
If I recall correctly, the recommendation in the staff report, and some of that was generated by good discussion that happened at the committee level, was for a commitment for us to review the program 1 year from the time that the bylaw was enacted. The bylaw came into effect on June 1st of 2021. So essentially, staff will be looking at doing an annual review. It'll likely be sometime next May or June, going through administrative policies that would give you a summary of the first year of the program, as well as any kind of feedback or concerns that we have related to the Hamari contract, because it is a 1 year contract. So that is the commitment that staff will be carrying through.
We seem to have lost the tail end of that, but I think my second question, I know I mentioned this a year ago in that big meeting that Councillor Chappelle referred to, every time somebody comes in delegation that's an STR, they self-identify, rightfully so, as a small business. Are we aware if they have in fact received a City of Kingston business license? And if not, isn't that something that we should be pursuing?
Yeah, thank you, and through you. So our current business bylaw doesn't cover this element of small business as a requirement for a business license, which is where the creation of the STR license came into place to be able to cover that off from a business perspective.
Okay, thank you. And my final question you may not be able to answer, and it came up after I'd already asked my 2 questions of both delegations. It popped into my mind. They both mentioned that they are now registering for 31 days in order to avoid the licensing requirement. I'm curious, are they still going through Airbnb and registering for 31 days?
Thank you, and through you. So I can't speak to the status of both of the delegations with respect to any contract they have with Airbnb or listing their accommodation there on more of a medium-term basis. When we go through and we look at the postings to determine who's operating in STR, if the qualification data that the operator has posted is indicating that they're renting for longer than 30 days, that would make them exempt from the bylaw, and therefore we wouldn't be pulling them forward as an operator that requires a license.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if I were an STR operator and I registered for 30 days, would Airbnb send me a request saying somebody is interested in 2 weeks? And if that's the case, would the system capture that information? Just curious.
Yeah, thank you, and through you. So the information that we extract is what's available on the public listing associated with the STR. So if it's being listed as longer than 30-day stay, so it's no longer considered a short-term rental by way of our bylaw, they wouldn't be subject to a license. But to your point, whether or not somebody would be in communication with them with a stay that would be less than that, those are things sometimes that take place between the operator and a prospective renter, independent of the Airbnb platform. I can't speak to all of the details about how Airbnb regulates that. I just know how the data is pulled relative to the applicability of our bylaw for operators in the community.
Thank you very much.
Next is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm kind of troubled a little bit by this debate because I feel like we're kind of trying to undo what we decided already. So I'm going to ask, because Mr. Ligniti in one of the delegations suggested that the provider that we're using, the third party group that we're using, Hamari, their data is going to be unreliable. So that puts these fines somewhat in question. So I wonder if either Mr. Campo or Ms. Agnew could comment on why that is or is not the case.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So relative to the MAT collection, the MAT portal, it's a self-remittance portal that has been established by way of the council direction. That goes live at the end of October, and that would be the first period of remittance relative to any operators that have been operating in compliance with the bylaw and licensed since June 1st. So in terms of that process, because it's a self-remittance portal, essentially what the operator does is they go in, they log into the system, they put in their information, they indicate the number of days that they've rented within that period. And what we request is documentation, which if they're on any type of Airbnb platform or short-term operator platform, our understanding through working with the host is that they print out invoices so that they know for their own tax purposes the number of days that they've rented within a period of time. And that becomes their supporting documentation with their MAT remittance. The information that Hamari is able to put in terms of high-level estimates of what the MAT remittance should be on a quarterly basis, it's just a stopgap that we have in place to reference against the actual documentation that's provided by the hosts.
Okay, so if Airbnb was the third-party provider, in this case, we required everyone to join Airbnb, we would still have to implement some kind of enforcement, fines or whatever in order to ensure compliance, would we not?
Mr. Shampa.
Thank you, and through your worship, I want to make sure it's clarified that there is still a measure and there's still a tool in place for our enforcement officers, and that is by way of a Part 3 summons to enforce this bylaw currently. So it's not like there's no enforcement tool currently being used. There is a measure that's in place, and it's very very punitive compared to the measures that we're trying to recommend. So I wanted to say that we do still have that option, but we're continuing to recommend less punitive measures. When we get the information from Hamari, that is one element towards many elements to substantiate charges from an investigative measure. So we were asked earlier, and I believe Councillor Stroud wanted to ask that question. It is not based solely on the information that's given to us by Hamari. There's lots of investigation elements that would substantiate a charge going forward. And based on all of those elements, the prime principle that we are continuing to focus on is education. And even if we were to get set fines, that doesn't mean that we're going to go to a punitive system where all of a sudden there's set fines being issued. This is still very heavily focused on the educational component. We've heard from sort of both delegations, and it's positive to hear that they want to have correspondence with the city. I would definitely encourage correspondence afterwards with myself and Mr. Hartling or Mr. Linguini. It is sort of discouraging, again, to hear from Southern delegations that the hosts are waiting to the last minute on a type of stance against this measure. So again, we're recommending something that is less punitive than the measure, but there is a measure that's still in place for enforcement right now.
Can I just ask then too, what might an outcome be from a Part 3 summons? Like what kind of fine or potential fine would somebody face?
Thank you. And through your worship, the fines can be 500 to 10,000 a day for hosts that failure to comply with certain violations. So it depends on what the violation is, but a Part 3 based on the Justice of the Peace decision. And again, I can maybe defer to Director Morley for further comment.
Ms. Morley.
Thank you, through your worship. I think Mr. Campo did a great job of explaining that. I just want to clarify what is before you tonight. The decision tonight does not in any way impact how our officers are going to carry out investigations. It doesn't impact whether or not we're going to enforce the bylaw. The question tonight is, will officers be able to issue set fine tickets, or will every individual who violates the bylaw be required to appear before the court for a hearing? Any individual that receives a set fine ticket still has the right to request a trial if they wish to do so and go through the provincial court process. What we're simply allowing tonight is for an opportunity to settle these matters out of court by giving individuals the option to simply pay a ticket.
Okay, and Ms. Morley, just to add to that, when you're establishing this, you look like you would for any fines that we would have. You look for a range, you look for some comparators, you settle on something that makes sense for this community relative to the kinds of things that we already have in place. Is that a fair comment?
Through your worship, that's correct. We look not only at what other municipalities are doing, we also look at the set fine amounts that we have under existing municipal bylaws. This is not a new process for the city of Kingston. We have set fines under various city bylaws like the animal bylaw, the signs bylaw, our nuisance party bylaw. This is a process that we ordinarily follow, and ordinarily we get these set fine amounts through the report where we're requesting passage of the bylaw itself. In this case, we took a bit of a detour because we requested AMPs, and when that was not approved, we're now moving through the next step in the process, which is to get those set fine amounts.
Okay, just a comment. I mean, I do feel a little bit like the debate was heading into the range of, maybe we can take the teeth out of this bylaw by, not having fines in place or making them so minimal that they're inconsequential. I hope that's not the intent of anyone. Tonight we have a bylaw in place. We need to follow the process that we put in place. We are going to review it. I certainly think that what's being proposed here tonight is very reasonable and very consistent with our practices in other areas. So I hope my fellow councillors will support what's in front of us tonight. Thank you.
Spencer Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to second Councillor Hill's comments. This is really just a housekeeping issue. We need to have fines to make the bylaw work effectively. There's some indication that we have more people on the system or who can be detected on the system than we have people signing, getting their license. So we're going to work with that as a city and see if that in fact is the case. But in the meantime, we need a system of fines to make it work, as we do with 4 or 5 other bylaws. And it seems to me that Councillor Hill mentioned the word fair, and that's what we're trying to determine here. Is it fair? That's what Councillor Stroud's comments, having spoken to him before the meeting, is essentially looking at, is this fair? Can we justify this relative to what else is there? Now, Mr. Campo, indicated, well, it's better than, if you're going to get fined, it's better than going to court. And we're actually bringing the fine amount down considerably. There's a long way from 10,000 for a portion of a day, potentially down to $750 or $250. So my question is, so I think that tells you where I'm coming from here. The question of having a policy for STRs, that was decided. So what we're talking about now is if you don't comply, what is the fine? Just to give context to this, I had someone come and speak to me, someone phoned me today and asked me about this. And I checked over the report and I said, you indicated that you are one of the people that has signed up to your license. And I said, so this doesn't really apply to you. You're not going to get fined for having a license, right? So, but for those who refuse to do so or are reluctant to do so and are going to do later, well, that's a different matter. And it'll be on a case-by-case basis. So anyway, the one thing I wanted to get straight was, I believe the report says, and this gets a bit confusing, basically staff presented a third way. There's part 3 going through the court, there's the administrative monetary penalties, and there's setting the fine right now. If I'm wrong about that, somebody can just jump up and hit me with a small hammer. So the administrative monetary penalties are indicated as always lower, 25% lower than the set fines. And I guess that comes from the survey of municipalities. So that just happens to turn out to be the case. I'd like to be corrected on that if I've got that wrong. Not seeing any hands going up. Okay, so it came up before, 200, 400, 600. I think some councillors are concerned that they don't look like they're smashing a fly with a hammer. So why would we not take, other than the survey, why would we not set the penalty at the same level as the administrative monetary penalty? If we want to show good faith, perhaps. I'm not saying we have to, but if we did. That's my question.
Who would like to respond to that question?
I thought that.
Okay, Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you, and through you. So yes, based on the research, what we've found is that AMPs are typically about 25% less. There's less work involved in them for sure from an administration standpoint, and it's something that can be completely administered at the municipal level, whereas even with the Part 1, there is more paperwork because it does go through the Ontario court system. With respect to your question, Councillor, certainly we are able to take Council's direction or suggestion related to fines and looking at that relative to the AMP amounts that we suggested back in the June report, that is at your direction. These are just staff recommendations relative to our research.
Mr. Campo?
Thank you. And through you, I also just wanted to point out that for short form or set fine amounts, those are also passed through the Solicitor General. So for less punitive measures. So if you wanted to put the set fine amounts as the same as the administrative monetary penalty amounts, we would then be doing a significant less administrative monetary penalty set fine if we were to recommend them again. But if we ever wanted to change that set fine amount, that process is quite a tedious process compared to what it would be to change our AMP process. And that would be by way of council, where council has the ability to put them up or put them down compared to what the process would be if we wanted to raise or reduce the set fine amounts. So it's quite a more strenuous process for the set fines compared to the AMPs.
Question, Mr. Mayor. Is there any reason, is there any problem with equating them legislatively in terms of municipal legislation? We deferred the idea of fines earlier and 9 months ago, and now we could set it at the same level of administrative monetary penalties. Are we staff somehow concerned that then we're equating something that we deferred? Is there some kind of legislative here?
So I'll stop you there, Councillor Hutchison. You have 30 seconds on the clock, but I'll then pass the floor over to staff to answer that question.
Thank you, and through you. So if council wishes to give us direction to go back and have a look at that and come back to you with revised fine amounts that are more in line with what we recommended for the AMPs back in June, we're certainly able to do that. The one thing I would caution just on timing is that relative to being able to have a set fine, as Mr. Campo indicated, this goes through the Solicitor General's office for approval. So it involves a level of review and approval that happens outside of the municipality. So it just prolongs the time until we have that enforcement tool in place, given that we are 4 months after the bylaws come into effect, but we're happy to take that direction if that's what council is comfortable providing to us.
Councillor Hutchison, you have 30 seconds.
I want to make an amendment, and that the amendment is that the set fines for STRs be made equivalent to the administrative monetary penalties.
Okay, so just.
I need a seconder.
Okay, hold on 1 second, Councillor Hutchison. I just need a minute.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Hutchison, I don't think we, unless you have what those numbers are, what I would suggest is rather than trying to amend that on the floor, that you would defer back to staff to bring forward those revised fine amounts. I believe that that's what Commissioner Agnew had suggested, rather than trying to amend it.
Okay. I'll make a motion to defer this this report back to staff for consideration to making the set fines equivalent to the administrative monetary penalties, or as close as reasonably possible.
Okay, so again, just give me 1 second. So Councillor Hutchison, so I'm going to we recess for 10 minutes so they can put in writing the details here, because we would need a motion to understand when staff are reporting back and just details on that wording. So I'll give you 10 minutes just to confer with clerks just to get that wording.
Sure.
So it's 8:26, so we will recess until 8:36. Okay, folks, it's 8:36, so we will reconvene. Councillor Hutchison has the floor and has put forward a motion to defer. So I will ask if that motion can be put up on the screen so that we can all see it. Okay, so motion to defer moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor McLaren. The report 84, clause 1 from the CAO be deferred and referred back to staff in order for staff to report back at the council meeting scheduled for November 2nd with respect to set fines that are in keeping with the administrative monetary penalty numbers that were presented in June of 2021. Okay, so we have a motion to defer that's on the floor. Debate is respect to time, place, or purpose, and you have up to 1 minute to speak. Councillor Hutchison, you have the floor if there's anything you want to say.
Thank you. I think that I made myself pretty clear before. This is just a matter of making the bylaw that we've already endorsed previously 9 months ago, make it effective. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to have a set of fines, even if you're not going to apply them, because hopefully people will register, right, and be licensed. And so I just want to make sure it's a fair amount, and following on comments, particularly by Councillor Stroud and Councillor Hill and others. And so that's why I'm suggesting we defer this motion and find out what those, we have to be precise. So let's find out what the numbers would precisely be if we take the least onerous route. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Stroud.
My comments are to purpose, just so we're clear on the purpose of the deferral, because Councillor Hutchison was talking about amendment. The purpose of the deferral after recommendation from staff was to get the exact amount rather than try to make them up. That's what your worship said. So that's the purpose of the deferral, and I think it's as long as it's clear in our minds, the purpose of the deferral is to get the exact set fine amount in line with the fair numbers that were in the administrative policies report from the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we will call the vote then on the motion to defer. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on then to report number 85 from Heritage Kingston.
Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, or excuse me, Deputy Mayor Osterhoff, that report number 85 from Heritage Kingston be received and adopted.
There's just the one clause in civic collection acquisitions and de-accessions. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, report number 86 from the Nominations Advisory Committee.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that report number 86 from the Nominations Advisory Committee be received and adopted.
Okay, so there's the one clause, which is public appointments to boards and committees. So that would be that John Rose and Flong McNeil be appointed to the Kingston and Frontenac Housing Corporation Board of Directors for a term ending November 30th, 2022. That Dina Cotter be appointed to the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee for a term ending November 14th, 2022, and that Cameron Gunn be appointed to the Rural Advisory Committee for a term ending November 14th, 2022. We'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, report number 87 from the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee.
Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that report number 87 from the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee be received and adopted.
So there's the one clause, appointment of members to the Mayor's Arts Awards Working Group. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have nothing from Committee of the Whole. Information reports, we just have one. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Number one, fees and charges for heritage planning services under the Ontario Heritage Act. Okay, yes, Councillor Rosanna.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I have a question to staff, and I just wondered, so are these new fees, that's it? And they're already approved, or does it come to council for approval?
Ms. Campbell, or Commissioner Agnew.
Sorry about that. We both clicked in at the same time. So those are high-level recommendations from staff. They're not yet approved. Council's opportunity to do that would be through the fee report, which will be coming forward in the next couple of months. But we're happy to take feedback tonight and wanted council to be aware of some of the commentary that came through the Heritage Kingston discussion on this when it was there this past month.
Okay, thank you. And I did read some of the commentary from the Heritage Committee. So I see that there was discussion about the fees. Not everybody agreed with the set amounts. I know that it was a few months ago when council did approve the heritage permit fee of $300, like a flat fee. So I just wondered, how come now we're also looking at these variable fees? Like I thought the flat fee was going to be, $300, and that would be at least a couple of years. I didn't realize that then we were also looking at these variable fees. So how come we first started with that flat fee then?
Thank you, and through you. So that fee, Councillor, was approved through the fee report that went to council last November or December as part of that prior to the budget being passed. And that $300 amount was based on work that we did overall with respect to all of the applications going through planning services as they were organized in 2018. And it was only a very high level look at some of the services that Heritage Services now are providing. So 3 or 4 years later, we have a new department, and we had an opportunity to do a much more thorough deep dive with respect to all the different types of services and applications, and also hearing from the committee, looking at where we could look at having very minor fees for things that are more at the delegated authority level rather than treating everything the same. We had the opportunity over the last number of months to work and do sort of a process review map for each of those services to look at the staff inputs and then determine the actual cost. And that's some of the information that's in the report. So the difference from the original $300 fee, like I said, that came from the fee assessment we did in 2018, but that was only at a high level for a very specific type of heritage application, or not as an extensive list to what we were able to do this time, and in reflection of the new Heritage Services Department.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, so we know, or we see what the Heritage Committee comments are. What about the members of the community, like those in Sydenham Ward, those in Berryfield? How have they been informed of these fee, like the proposed fees, or what is the plan to get their inputs? Because I don't know if everybody watches the Heritage Committee on YouTube, I'm just wondering if the residents living in these heritage districts are even aware of what's being proposed. Thank you.
I can jump in and thank you and through you. We have not done public consultation on the fees and the use or the possibility of imposing new fees. Of course, Heritage Kingston is an open committee meeting, as you're well aware. But you're right, all residents aren't always aware of the agenda items or the opportunity perhaps to speak into that discussion. We can certainly bring the discussion back to community members, but I would note as well that the application of fees and the updates to the fees and charges bylaw are not always don't always follow a public consultation process. It's an opportunity for staff to work with council and community, of course, to think about appropriate fees and charges. If we were to bring this to public consultation, I think it would also behoove us, or it would be appropriate to ask the broader Kingston community, as well, as a significant portion of the work is also funded by the tax base. And we know that that was then carried not only by heritage property owners, but the broader Kingston community as well.
All right, thank you.
Your next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Thanks for this report too. And I guess in line with Councillor Osanik's questions, I guess I should say I might have missed this part, and I'm on Heritage. So I just want to ask the question, and maybe I mentioned it earlier at the meeting, but is there a municipality that is similar to us in its heritage that recovers more, or is that, are we close to where that be? It seems to me that the cost recovery is still low, and is there an effort to? I guess that's the effort, is to recover more of our costs, isn't it?
Thank you, and through you. It's difficult to assess cost recovery for every municipality that may be applying fees, and that's because we certainly don't have the same kind of analysis of the associated real costs for those fee processes. So we can't really do a cost recovery comparison per se. In the report, you would have noticed that we tried to draw comparisons to those municipalities that have implemented fees, just for council's awareness of what the fees being employed across the province are. We are aware through one of the listservs that does offer opportunity to engage with other planning and heritage groups across the province. The discussions around fees for heritage services is something that many municipalities are starting to engage in and explore. So certainly we don't see tens of municipalities at this point engaged. And by comparison, there's obviously a different heritage landscape across the province, and rightly pointed out in the report as well, is that we really can't draw a comparison direct to Ottawa, for example, or to St. Catharines, because our heritage circumstances are quite a bit different. So the initiative and the intent here is to look at the $300 fee that was implemented as a starting point, and to then sort of think about what is a scalar correction. And in some cases that's upward, and in other cases you'll see that that's also downward, so that when we're looking at the staff and the actual costs, we're looking at something that's much more attuned to the real costs, the staff effort and the energy that's required to bring those heritage considerations forward.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that.
Next is Councillor Neal.
Yes, I appreciate the questions that Councillor Osanik asked regarding some kind of public consultation, because I too had the feeling at the $300 fee that we were, and I'd like staff to comment on this, I felt like we were getting close to the point where some people might stop wishing to come through Heritage Committee if the fees get higher. And I was hoping that staff can comment on that, because quite frankly, I think we have a very cooperative, supportive heritage community. But if we nickel and dime them, we may lose their willing consent to participate. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I think it was brought by committee as well, this consideration and this concern. I think one of the things we've noted in the report is that we think there are opportunities to apply opportunities for incentives, if one will, so that if you were to make the $300 permit application for a work or even a higher fee, $500, for example, if there was an adjustment made, you're also then opening yourself up to the opportunity to apply for the $5,000 grant that is available to property owners to offset the costs of maintenance on those properties. And this is also true for properties that are subject to a heritage easement agreement. So we do, and we did mention in the report, the opportunity to offset some of these costs. We also identified that if the fees were to be adjusted in the way that staff were presenting here for consideration, that we would also be liking to make a recommendation to council that we would include heritage fees within the municipal fee assistance program, so that individuals who may have lower incomes would have an opportunity to have their fees waived at 100% fee waiver. So the opportunity would be there to help to incentivize. And I also would like to draw council's attention to the fact that the other opportunity we think that comes with these modest increases to fees is also an opportunity to direct funds into the reserve fund that currently provides those granting opportunities to heritage property owners. That's a reserve fund we've been drawing down with $50,000 annually in distribution to heritage grants. And obviously that's not a sustainable drawdown if we don't start to put some money back into this. And this would not be a significant amount of money. We're proposing 10% of a fee would go into that fund. But we are, very aware of the possibility for fees to create, barriers. And that is certainly not the objective with the use of these fees.
Thank you. And I look forward to the proposal coming forward after some public consultation. I have to say, and I can't say this in the form of a question, but I will say the jury's still out.
Okay, thank you.
For me.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I received an email today asking about how this may affect general maintenance and repairs of heritage attributes. Could you please speak to that?
Thank you, and for you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, if I'm understanding the question correctly, Councillor, about how would this impact general repairs and maintenance? Is that yeah? So currently, general repairs and maintenance can be covered in HCDs and also through delegated approvals to make those repairs and those alterations to properties. If there is a need to seek a heritage permit, however, there would be a fee applied. That is the current structure. But just by way of comparison, if we were to be looking at a delegated authority approval in this proposal or an emergency approval, so the delegated authority approvals are what we currently would have for minor repairs and maintenance that fall within the listed attributes and the alterations to them. The fee would not be different from what's currently in place. We would continue with the $300 fee. There is, however, an opportunity through delegated approvals that are in response to what we would consider emergency repairs. Currently, those are subject to a $300 fee under the delegated approval or authority bylaw for heritage matters. But in this update, we would actually be reducing that fee to $100 in the hopes then that we're better facilitating those emergency repairs that currently would be subject to a $300 fee. So for routine maintenance and repair, the fee would essentially remain the same as it is presently. For emergency responses, it would be decreased.
Thank you. However, it was noted by some members of the Heritage Committee that some cities like Ottawa, for example, for maintenance and repairs, that they actually don't charge a fee because that's actually intended to protect the property. Are we considering that at all, excluding repairs and maintenance?
Sorry. Thank you, and through you. In the report, staff mentioned that we think that if we were to consider a $0 fee, the best or most appropriate place to consider applying it would be to some of the delegated approvals, which would speak to those more routine maintenance and repairs. I would note as well that the City of Ottawa's escalating fee structure rises quite a bit higher than what is being considered here as well. So from a total cost recovery perspective, though we don't know the true costs associated with processing those files, when you have costs or fees that are in the upwards of the $10,000, the opportunity then to have $0 fee structures at the sort of more frequent end of that scale and to transfer the cost to larger property developments is certainly one other alternate approach to perhaps balancing the fee structure.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing I noticed as fees escalate in an effort to compensate for rising costs and administrating these fees is that there's always a scope creep. So if this is to be deferred and you were to bring this back to council for further reflection, I would like to know what the staff complement was and the costs were when the fee structure was it's currently at $300 to where you want to go and what the current cost structure of your staffing is, to see if this is really about cost recovery within the department rather than maybe there's other things that we should be looking at rather than taxing on residents that already pay an exorbitant amount of property taxes to maintain a very costly adventure of maintaining these beautiful buildings. So can you, when you come back, can you bring forward a cost comparison of when the fees were first structured and the cost for your department versus what it is now and the new costs that you wish to apply on these fines?
Thank you, and through you. At this time, this is an information report only. There is no recommendation being made to council. And so the opportunity, I believe, to defer and to return with an iteration of the report, I don't believe follows how this would technically currently move forward. But I appreciate the request and the consideration. I would add in this moment right now, not having looked at the variances, the work that Watson did to assess the costs associated with the processing of these applications really isn't reflective of the current structure, quote unquote, of the department. It's about the staff hours and the use time to process an application. And so in that regard, the cost, for example, of a heritage planner is a set net cost. And so the application or handling time doesn't vary for the application based on the number, for example, of heritage planners that might be within a department in a given time. I hope that makes sense, but I'm happy to clarify if needed.
No, sure, that's fine. And you mentioned you hired a consultant to analyze this. Can you advise the cost of the consultant, please?
Thank you, and through you. I don't have that number in front of me right now, but I believe it was approximately $6,000 to $8,000, Councillor, but I can confirm that and share that with you if necessary, or with all of council if needed.
No, I'm just always interested in the cost of consultants, and the way we use them seems to be abundant. So thank you very much for clarifying.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Worship. I have a question about table 1 of the consultant report. So this is important because this is the formula they use to come up with the numbers in the table that justifies the fee increases. So on the one hand, on the near the beginning of the report on page 6, you've got the list of current fee $300, right, and then the proposed future fee, and then the real cost per application on the left. And you can see some of those costs are high, and that justifies adding a new cost, for example, for pre-consultations and heritage easement agreements, which were previously there was no fee, and now there's a fee, and etc. So we go to this table from Watson report, which is on page 2 of the report of the Watson report, Exhibit A. It has a table of an annual capacity of heritage applications, right? So you'll see there right away, you'll see the senior planner policy, 62%. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that means 62% of the heritage senior planners work year go into processing heritage applications. Is that what that 62% means?
Thank you, and through you. Yes, it represents the percent of time that the annual capacity of that planner would be afforded to the processing of these heritage aspects. Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so that that's more than half of their job, and that you can see having interacted with heritage planners, I can see where that number is coming from. Obviously, it's not the only thing that they do, but it's a big part of what they do. It's their sort of main role, I suppose you could say, if they're working as a heritage planner. Now, and I am aware that that's being restructured, and it's sort of it's the planning department in general is spreading the work around or whatever. But anyways, the numbers I'm assuming came from a survey where people are answering questions from the consultant. Is that correct?
Thank you, and through you, I can start, and then perhaps Commissioner Agnew can step in because she was involved in the 2018 analysis. But it is my understanding in my review of the previous work done by Watson in 2018 that yes, there was essentially process mapping that was considered to look at who would have touched applications and in what time amount and in what capacity. And then also an adjustment to their salaries at that time to look at what the cost recoveries would be for each individual then that has to move the process forward, so to speak. So from the majority of time from the person who drafts the report to the review considerations from the director and up, but also, if legal services needs to weigh on a heritage easement agreement, there's a greater weight to lay to the legal services department side of things. So my understanding is that in 2018, there were robust process maps done. And this is the opportunity at this time was to look to the process mapping, confirm that those process maps were still accurate for the intents and the mechanisms by which reports move forward, and to then update them to consider these additional fee categories or the opportunities for cost recovery in these more scaled and precise considerations of the heritage work that's actually being done.
Right. I'm just trying to get to one level behind the numbers in this table, because it's obvious that they use that table, they multiplied it by the salary of those positions. That's the way they came up with the numbers. It all makes logical sense, but if you take the chief administrative officer's salary and multiply it by 3%, you get a pretty big number, because the chief administrative officer's salary is quite high, and you're going on an estimate, presumably from the CAO, you didn't answer exactly, of how many hours per year it might be, or I find it's quite a blunt estimate, and I'm wondering if there's any way we can get more transparency in how the consultant came up with those numbers, because that's what's used to justify these fees.
Sorry, thank you, and through you, I'm having trouble with my mute button now. I would suggest that the opportunity to share the 2018 document. When the 2018 work done was Watson, there was a complete report issued that spoke in greater detail to the methodology that was deployed at the time. There are also costs associated with things like photocopying and paperwork and the like that were considered. And when we asked Watson to update the existing process that was used in 2018, in the report that they've issued, you see appended here, it doesn't include the complete description of that process. I'm not trying to dodge the question, and I'm happy to provide a copy of the report that was provided in 2018, but I also don't want to misrepresent the methodology. It's certainly not my subject matter expertise, and part of the reason why we work with a consulting company to understand these real costs. So I am happy to provide counsel if it suits the copy of the document that was provided in 2018, which does include a more robust breakdown of the methodology and the process that was used, and then was used in this iteration as well.
Well, I know they got to get their numbers somehow, but it just seems if the CEO is spending 3% of her year on heritage permits,
so
heritage applications, what does that tell us? What does that tell us about how time consuming they are for the CEO? That just seems a little bit problematic when you think of it that way. So it'd be nice to see behind those numbers, to see if you just
Councillor Stroud, I think Ms. Campbell suggested that she could provide the report with the methodology. So I think we probably should leave.
Fine. I'll move on to a different question then. So while we're on we're taking the approach of cost recovery. Why is it that we're doing this for heritage to begin with, and we don't do it for things like parks and arenas and places like that?
Thank you, and through you. So as part of the introduction of the $300 fee last year and the conversation that took place at Heritage Kingston in response to that, there was a commitment for staff to have a look at this in greater detail and go back to Heritage Kingston with the consultation. So to Ms. Campbell's point, we utilized the fee structure analysis that was done in 2018 when Heritage was part of the department, because we already had that model set up. And there was a lot of time that went into setting up that model and the process mapping. So we were simply looking to update with additional fee categories using the same methodology that we've used to approve and present recommendations relative to planning fees. Now, with respect to recreation, leisure, I mean, I can't speak to that. Each group evaluates their fees a little bit differently and does a business case and evaluates that relative to the recommendations they make to council. But from a consistency perspective, because we had evaluated heritage fees and that's the recommendation, we wanted to look at make sure we're using the same model and updating it with more current information relative to the additional fee categories so that we weren't treating all applications the same and we're having the greater differentiation so that we could evaluate the different level of effort associated with each of those categories and then make a potential fee recommendation accordingly to do a little bit better on cost recovery than we've been able to do before, knowing this is a growing area of interest for the city and for council as a priority. And we want to be able to fund, to Ms. Campbell's point, some money also back into that Heritage Reserve Fund, which we keep continuing to draw down on, but doesn't have a source of renewal that's going on an annual basis. And of course, that forms the basis of our grant program as well. So we're trying to think about this and treat this department more from a business sense and keeping that in check with also the consideration of making sure that whatever we're doing from a fee perspective, we're not doing something that's so much of a change or too aggressive that it does really keep people from going through the process of applying for the actual approvals themselves and then doing the work on the side. So it's a balance between the two, and trying to apply the business planning in the sense that have been applied elsewhere in community services to the continuation and the growth of the Heritage Services Group that's part of the city corporate structure now.
Right. But the reason I asked about parks and arenas is that we don't expect cost recovery from parks and arenas. I'm talking about I'm talking about recreation. I'm talking about parks. You know, there's no user fees at the outdoor rinks. There's no user fees. You know, there's no cost to cover at all in those portfolios. So here we've got cost estimates of staff time used to justify a real cost per application number that's in this table. To the point of your of the Heritage Grant thing, that's not even in this table. That's not even.
Question, Councillor Stroud, is there a question?
The Heritage Grant replenishment is not.
Stroud, is there a question?
So how are we to hear your verbal comments about the Heritage Grant needing replenishment? How are we supposed to link that to the heritage fees when that's not here?
Councillor, to answer your question, there is information in the report that would suggest at a high level what we looked at from a staff recommendation, or at least for discussion at council, would be 10% of the fees being funneled into the Heritage Fund. That is in the staff report. It's not in the table specifically, but it's part of the information that's included in the report that's before you tonight for consideration and discussion.
Stroud, do you have any other questions?
Well, I guess would just be a rhetorical one. I don't understand the purpose of this information report.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council? I saw one other hand. Okay, seeing none, then we will move on. So we have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business. We do have one motion moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. Notwithstanding section 3.1.4 subsection 4 of the First Capital Place Illumination Policy, council approved the application submitted by Marissa Gougion for the illumination of City Hall and Springer Market Square on October 15th, 2021 for Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no new motions this evening. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, seeing none, Madam Deputy Clerk, I'll ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 21-2021 held Tuesday, September 21st, 2021 be confirmed.
In favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And we have some communications. Is there any other business? Okay, Madam Deputy Clerk, I will ask for.
Moved by Councillor Boehm, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that bylaws 1, 11, and 12 be given their first and second reading.
In favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Bowen, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that clause 12.63 of bylaw number 2021-41 be suspended for the purpose of giving bylaw 1 3 readings.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Pardon me, I muted myself instead of unmuted myself. Moved by Councillor Bowen, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that bylaws 1 through 12 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Bowen, seconded by Councillor McLaren. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.